Well, good afternoon to you all from here in Dubai. My name's Sam Champong. I'm the regional head for SITS-MENA, which is the Middle East and North Africa office of the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply. Welcome to today's webinar, where we're going to look at probably the most in-demand skill set of procurement and supply today, and that's soft skills. We're going to look at how important soft skills are now that we're all trying to gain a sense of what's important in the midst of the new normal. If you do have any questions at all, as we go through this session, please type them in the Q&A box below. We will allocate plenty of time to answer all of your questions, hopefully, at the end. Now, to take us through the session, we're very fortunate to have Ian Castle and Tim Jenkins from A Headspace. Gentlemen, over to you.
Thank you very much, Sam, for the introduction, and welcome everyone. It's great to be with you, for us this afternoon, and of course for you as well. And you join us on the south coast of England, and so it's summer here, so that means it's about 16 degrees centigrade, it's windy, and it's raining quite hard. So I hope that you don't have the sound of the rain coming into the presentation, but it's great to be with you today. And as Sam says, we're going to talk about this important area of soft skills, what that means to us in terms of the need to be adaptable in what we call the new extraordinary. You know, around March last year when the pandemic was declared, I said to Tim, lots of people are talking about the new normal. I said, but the thing is, Tim, you know, normal means the same, and there's nothing about the way we're having to work and the way we're having to adapt that is normal. And this really is the new extraordinary. Actually, I now question 18 months on, as Sam has now said, actually, things are becoming a little bit more normal. And one of the questions that we have to think about is how this way of hybrid working, of meeting virtually, of having to engage with stakeholders and suppliers in these new ways is going to become very much the normal for us. But we're looking forward to the session with you today. And our promise to you is that this will be what we call a taster, not a teaser. We will include some real insight from our masterclasses and workshops, and we will share with you some recommendations, some tips that we want you to take away and apply to your work practice. Now, when it comes to being adaptable, for Tim and I, you're joined, we're delighted to have you here in our virtual studio. We built this last year because we recognised that face-to-face training was going to change, and we needed to find a new way to communicate with teams across the world. And isn't it fantastic that here we are today from the south coast of England, working face-to-face with you all and presenting to you. I'm delighted to be joined here by my colleague Tim Jenkins, and I'm Ian Castle. One of the things that Tim and I talk about in terms of our philosophy is when we train people, when we run our masterclasses, we tend to have a class size which, Tim, really doesn't usually go beyond 14, does it? 12 to 14.
Not, no.
Because we want to be able to interact with you. And the way that we've set ourselves up here is to try and replicate what you used to experience in a classroom, in a training room, and an opportunity to be interactive. Our philosophy is we want participants who actively participate, not attendees who just attend. Why do I say that? Well, the nature of this type of session, a webinar, of course, it is very one way. So it isn't our natural way of presenting. And we're sorry that we don't have the chance for you to interact with us. But as Sam has said, please do ask questions, because we do hope to find some time to answer some questions later on. Now, Tim, I want to sort of kick us off. And I think the first area that I want to talk about is just starting to think about why soft skills are important. And I suppose as a way of encapsulating that, what I would say is, for all of the participants that are here with us today, I think something that we want to get into their mindset is that every time they interact with someone, they give that other person an experience of themselves. And that experience can be one of two things. It can either be positive or it can be negative. It's rarely neutral, is it?
No, absolutely. And it's interesting, isn't it, that when you start thinking about the experience that you give of yourself to somebody, Ian and I are not trained trainers. Ian comes from a management consultancy background. I come from a commercial sales background. And we've spent years working on negotiation. And people always, they talk about negotiation skills and persuasion and influence. But the reality of that situation is that whenever you negotiate with somebody, okay, in your role, okay, whether you be in a procurement role, whether that's pre-market, contract management, whether you're a stakeholder in that organization, essentially it's never your organization with another organization. It's always one individual at that moment in time interacting and negotiating with another individual. That's where the persuasion influence comes from, which is why we talk about soft skills, not technical skills. That's why we're not giving you a presentation with lots of 4-box matrices on and showing you slide after slide. What we want to try and get across to you is that soft skills and adaptability and how we build relationships is all about interpersonal relationships. What we mean then as well by giving people positive experiences of you. Nobody ever comes off a phone call and has a neutral position or thought of how that interaction went with you. Okay, you know, there's a famous phrase from an American poet who says, "People will forget the words you say, they'll forget what you do, but they'll never forget how you made them feel." And that's interesting, isn't it? Because when we think about the experiences you give of yourself, that can be face-to-face, it can be a video call, it can be a video call without video, it can be a phone call, it can be an email, and we'll certainly get onto email a little bit later. It can be a WhatsApp, a text message. It can even be how you therefore come across perhaps on your LinkedIn profile or any research that people do on you. Every single time that someone has some form of interaction with you, you give them that experience. And that's the one thing that Ian and I ask people to think about the most, because there's no point to then go on and talk about persuading and influencing techniques if you don't have that one nailed down first.
That's right, Tim. And there is a recommendation that I'm going to make in a few minutes about LinkedIn. But before we get to that, I think one of the things that we can usefully to do today is to sort of talk to the team about how suppliers think about soft skills. And when it comes to suppliers and salespeople and soft skills, one of the things that they're very skilled in doing is their research. And the reason that they do their research is they know that it's very important to find commonality with the people that they're going to meet with. Those might be stakeholders, or it might be people in a commercial or a procurement role. And what will go through the head of a supplier is, you know, you won't buy from me if you don't trust me. You won't trust me if you don't like me. And you won't like me if we can't find commonality. And what a supplier will do is use research to take that risk of commonality away, because they know that knowledge is power and preparation is power. When we work with commercial teams, we often ask them the question, you know, what research do you do? Not into the firm that you're maybe meeting or working with, but into the individuals that you're meeting with. Because what suppliers are doing is they are using all the tools that are at their disposal to look at LinkedIn, and they'll look at many things on LinkedIn, including, for example, your profile photo, if you have one. They'll ask themselves the question, is it a professional headshot, or is it been cut and pasted from somewhere else? And if it has, that normally means from social media. So it's very easy for them then to move across to social media and to learn more about you, things that you might be interested in, things where they may be able to find some form of commonality. And here we are actually in a world where we're often meeting with people, Tim, in our home office or our home. And there's often many small things that we may have in the background where people can find a way of building that commonality. And I think a takeaway for the team here, Tim, is I would say to everybody, do your research and your preparation when you're meeting people, and look beyond the brand and think about the individual that you're going to meet. I have met commercial people, we both have, who are sometimes concerned, aren't they, about using LinkedIn because they think it leaves a sort of fingerprint. But using LinkedIn to research people you're going to meet with is not a buying signal. What it's saying to that individual is, my time is important, therefore your time is important, and I'm going to invest a little bit of effort to make sure that interaction we have with each other is effective as possible.
There's also an issue around, a lot of people feel uncomfortable with this when we work with procurement teams, and a lot of people often say, you know, how have you and Ian managed to, you know, embed yourself as a supplier with the UK government, with large organisations like Heineken or Boots or Sainsbury's? How have you done that as just a two-man band? And you know, when I take them through the research process that we do before we actually talk to an individual for the first place, huge amounts on LinkedIn, then Facebook, then Instagram, then Twitter, then Google Images, then their actual website themselves for the corporation, then the news feed on the corporation, then any press releases that might have come out, then into supply management, then onto SIPS's website, all that research. And it's not so that, you know, I can get on the call with Sam, for example, at SIPS for the first time and be like, hey, Sam, I hear you like windsurfing. Because that's going to, it's very false.
Yeah.
B, it's going to seem quite inappropriate. But really what we're trying to do here is we're trying to look at the fundamental subconscious of human relationships. Human relationships are built around social proof and liking in terms of persuasion. Okay, and that means that we want to be liked and we want to interact with people that we have commonality with. When you meet somebody for the first time, what we do is we tell stories. We use storytelling as a way to be able to do that. And what we do is we tell stories about ourselves and we ask questions of the person that we're with to try and find common ground. Because once we have common ground, the relationship can grow. What we do from a supplier perspective is we just take control of that first process to try and find the commonality. Being authentic is absolutely critical in this situation. It can't be false. I certainly couldn't, you know, come on to, you know, a call with Sam and say, I hear you like 17th century medieval double-handed sword play, because it would seem very niche and not authentic in any way whatsoever. Okay, but you know, very simply, it could be anything. For example, cycling or cookery, or even just being able to. Well, in fact, here's the best way to do it. Ian, do you want to give an example of the work we did with the Scottish Government a couple of weeks ago?
You know, it's funny because as you were just talking, I was thinking of exactly that story. And we worked with a senior commercial team in Scottish Government, and we were running a workshop for them over 2 days. We were working with them from 9 till 12:30 each morning for 2 days. And we covered research, stakeholder research and preparation on the first day. And one of the leaders in the team said, well, actually, I'm going to go away and test this because I've got a difficult meeting this afternoon. It's with a supplier where we're in some conflict and the relationship is very poor, and this is going to be a difficult meeting. So she went away and she did a little bit of research, and she was able to move from some LinkedIn research across to Facebook, and she found that he had family in France and she has family in France. So of course she didn't just open the call with, you know, here you have family in France. It'd be inappropriate, it'd be strange. But what she was able to do is in the normal start of a meeting with the, you know, how are you feeling? How's work? You know, how are you coping working virtually? She was just able to say, well, actually I'm okay, but, you know, I have been feeling, you know, a little bit sad because this is a time of year when I'm normally thinking about planning travel to see my family in France. And because of the pandemic, that's very difficult to plan and I miss them. And that was enough for the person she was meeting with to say, well, that's funny because I have a similar story. I feel exactly the same. And they talked about that, where they visit for a few minutes. And what it did is, it completely changed the tone of the meeting. It went from a meeting which was expected to be like this, a conflict and conflict management, into something where the heat had been taken out of this. They found commonality. And from there, they were able to have a much better, what we would call an adult to adult conversation. We'll talk later about the issues we sometimes have with soft skills, and where commercial teams often will have quite a parental tone with suppliers and with stakeholders. So there you go. There's a real example, a story of how that's worked. And I think as a takeaway for this area, Tim, what I would say to all of the team that are with us today is, remember that something like your LinkedIn profile is giving people an experience of you, people who may choose to work with you within your organization or to your suppliers. So if you have LinkedIn, after the webinar today, over the next few days, take a look at your LinkedIn profile and just ask yourself the question, does my profile give the experience of me that I want to give to other people? Just ask yourself that and perhaps bring it up to date if you feel it doesn't. And if you have got a LinkedIn profile which would allow people easily to move across to other social media, just think about making sure that that's locked down, because again, is there content there that you want to keep very much for your personal life, as opposed to allowing suppliers' research to bring it into a professional life by looking for commonality?
Well, it's interesting. Just a final little story on that. We did some work earlier in the year with a very, very large organisation that supplies to governments throughout the world. We had a procurement individual who was on the course. And of course, we were looking at who was going to be part of the group beforehand doing our research. And the gentleman's LinkedIn profile had been taken at what we can only assume was a family or a friend's wedding. Totally and utterly inappropriate for LinkedIn. And whether I liked it or not, my subconscious made a decision about him before I even met him. I automatically jumped to a conclusion because human beings are fickle individuals. We can't help it. And we do make judgments quickly. We then got onto the course, and he was one of the most intelligent, articulate, well-driven, motivated people that we trained in the last year. And I remember actually calling him separately after the training and saying, if I was a senior project manager in your business, there's no way I'd want you on my team, purely because I'd have made that leap purely from an image on you. You need to get that changed and change it up and think about, essentially to some extent, your personal brand, but really think about that experience that you're giving to people.
Absolutely. No, thank you for that, Tim. And that really links us now into the next area that I wanted us to cover today, which is the importance of questioning and how we're sold to. And again, thinking about this from where a supplier sits, they know that building that early rapport, ideally by finding some commonality, as we've just discussed, will get you off to a good start. But that's not enough. You then need to move into the next part of the process of building the relationship. And the world has moved on, hasn't it, from the days of, tell selling and just trying to talk about benefits.
Absolutely. I think, in the 1950s, tell sell is the way in which everybody would sell, which before the internet, etc. And what would happen is you'd say, here's my product, or here's my service, and this is what it can do. It can do this, this, and this, and the benefits are this, this, and this. But a guy called Neil Rackham in the 1970s worked out that the best way to sell to somebody was not to sell to them at all, was it? It was simply to ask them questions. And think about it if you meet somebody for the first time, if you're out to dinner or you meet somebody. If they spend the first 5 minutes and they just simply talk at you and talk about themselves, what experience of them do you get? It's rarely positive. What Rackham realised was that the easiest way to sell was not to sell at all. And for any of you in procurement who deal with professional services firms, IT organisations, HR firms, high-end media businesses, all of their supplier salespeople and account people will have been trained in what we would call consultative-based questioning. Okay, and the number one consultancy-based questioning technique, it's still number one in the world today, is still spin selling, 68 pages. Hopefully at some point, SIPs will agree to put that as mandatory reading for SIPs level 1. Ian, it's normally a £6,000 2-day course, but do you think we could give it to the attendees in 5 minutes?
I think we can, and I'd like to, because again, I think a recommendation I'm going to want to make at the end of this section is that the team really think about how they can learn more about spin and use it in their roles as well, because we see it used so effectively by some commercial organisations. And spin is a questioning technique that really starts with situation, and that's the S in spin. And this is just those comfortable questions, isn't it, Tim, that just allow us to build rapport, and they're comfortable. They're comfortable. How are things going? How's that new IT system working out since you installed it? How are the team getting in their new roles? Everyone's settled in and that's working well. Because the good consultative questioner will know that when you talk about the general situation, what it does is it leads us on to problems or opportunities. And you'll know if you're dealing with an inexperienced salesperson, because they will jump in at that point and say, well, I can help you with that. I can help you with this. Actually, the more sophisticated questioner will know that just by talking about those problems or opportunities will allow us to start to explore the implications of those problems or opportunities. And implication is the I in spin. And why is that important? Well, it's important because we're much more motivated to do something about things that have personal implications to us, the things that are making us have to go back in and check our email at 8 o'clock on a Saturday evening, the things that are making us worry about our next review within the organisation or our next move in the organisation, the thing that may give us a good opportunity to move forward and to take the next step. Because they know that through questioning, you can start to move to a position where your client, and this could be your internal stakeholder or client,
absolutely,
will themselves articulate what's needed. And by managing that process, what I know as a consultant, Tim, is that if I went through that process of questioning and my client made a decision, even if I couldn't help them with that decision, it actually didn't matter. It'd been a successful meeting because I'd helped them take a decision, and my status had moved up and I was becoming a trusted advisor. And it's critical for commercial teams that they become trusted advisors in order to become involved earlier in decisions. And one of the things that I've observed is that people talk about the process of developing specifications, and it's really hard, really hard. And actually, for a commercial team, I've always said, look, if you work amongst yourselves and with your stakeholders, talk about the situation, talk about what opportunities come from that or problems, talk about the implications of those opportunities, and then what needs to be done. And it's so powerful because often two things happen, Tim. Firstly, organizations start to identify through that process not what stakeholders say they want, but actually what they need. And how much dissatisfaction do we have when we deliver something and find out actually it wasn't what was needed? And that process of questioning is very good at uncovering that. What it also often does is identify situations where the organisation can do things for itself. They're not being sold to, they're actually developing competency and capability internally. So I think it's a really powerful technique.
There's another point there, isn't there, Ian, in the fact that if you have within your organisation stakeholders, and I'm sure we have someone on the call today who haven't necessarily defined their need, obviously what consultative questioning does from a supplier's perspective is that you can lead people with questioning down to helping that client to define the need to actually match what it is that you deliver. Yeah. And that's why it's so important for procurement teams to engage with their stakeholder audience early, and we'll talk about tonality in a little while on that subject. But the thing about questioning and relating that back into soft skills is that being an effective questioner is only good if you are also an effective listener. And listening as a soft skill is so underrated. Supplier salespeople tend to be quite rubbish at it an awful lot of the time because they're so desperate to move on to the next question, I remember interviewing salespeople and they'd say, so, how are things going? I'd say, well, we're behind by a quarter at the moment. We're about 3 million down. This year's going to be really hard. And they go, okay, great. And what do you see happening in the future? And I would stop them and say, sorry, what is great about the fact that we're a quarter behind? Yeah. And it's people just using those fill-in answers. It's respectful. And this is cultural nuances aside, taking time to listen, asking somebody a question, letting them answer, and if they ask you a question, taking a breath and taking a pause, taking time to think about that question, and then being able to answer it shows a very, very deep level of relationship building. If you're in a relationship sometimes with dominant people and they ask you a question, you start answering and then they just start cutting across you, automatically that experience that you've got of them is, hey, that person cut across me, and it's given you a negative experience. So listening is so critical. But if you can take that as a difference, a lot of people say in terms of networking, there's a really great way of using questioning. From a procurement perspective, if normally what happens, you can imagine if you get onto a group call with a chief executive or somebody very, very senior, or you're at a company away day, and you get introduced to one of the directors or one of the owners of the business, and they say, so how are things going? And what we tend to do is go, oh, it's really brilliant, our projects are going really fast, and they're fantastic, and everything's going really, really brilliantly. And the person goes, fantastic, and walks off. Yeah. Whereas actually, the very, very best way to then build a relationship with that person is to turn around and say, things are going well. However, I've got a question for you. I've recently read an article where you were commenting on the future of our business, etc. I was wondering if you could just give me some more information on that. How do you feel about that? What you're doing is you're allowing that person to talk, which is automatically enamoring you to that individual. You're giving them a good experience because you're asking them questions, because human beings innately like to talk about things that interest them, whether they be, whether you be introverted or extrovert, people still like to be given the opportunity to talk, don't they? So I think in kind of conclusion on that part, Ian, really I'm thinking looking at questioning is very important, but only if you're then being able to listen at the same time.
Yeah, exactly. I think my takeaway from this short section, Tim, would be to the team today, next time you're tempted to read a procurement book, don't. Read a sales book instead. Look at the relationship that you have from the other side and learn the skills that your suppliers are learning. That would be powerful. And I would say exactly the same to sales teams. We're working with one later this afternoon. They should be reading a procurement book next time they're tempted to read a sales book. And why not start with Spin? You'll find it on any book site, Amazon, for example. It's by Neil Rackham. It's quite short, but if you do read it, then try it and just use it. Use it internally, use it in lower risk situations, just see how it works. Start to use it in different relationships. And I think you'll find it's very, very effective in starting to create that kind of trusted advisor relationship that you will want with your colleagues and with your stakeholders in your organisation.
And with your suppliers as well.
And with suppliers, absolutely. Exactly.
Because it kind of leads on to something that we have this debate, and it crosses cultural boundaries all over the world, and people have different opinions that, in some places we treat our suppliers really harshly to get the very best deal. I've had this discussion, nay argument, a number of times with various different CPOs. But it's interesting. I think Patrick Dunn, who's the Chief Procurement Officer for Sainsbury's, the supermarket group in the UK, put it very best when we did a session with him about a month ago, and he said, you catch many more flies with honey than you do with vinegar.
Yeah.
And the truth about that, if you think about every time you interact with someone, it's an experience for them. If you, as the procurement individual, are not nice to me, the individual salesperson in my organisation, not the organisation as a whole, if you don't make an effort to be nice to me, you are never going to get the best deal from me. Because what we say in terms of the procurement holy grail, don't we, is in terms of how we look at things, is that you want me, the salesperson, to walk out of a room thinking two things. The first is, do you know what? I really, really like Sam, so I want to do a great job for him. But he controlled his buying signals, so I have absolutely no idea if he's going to buy from me. Because ultimately, there's only two things I can do as a supplier if I walk away from that situation, aren't there, Ian?
There are, Tim. I mean, really all you're left to do, you either reduce cost or you improve the offer. That's Absolutely. All that you can do. Yeah, it's very powerful. 100%. I'm really pleased that you've made that point. What I wanted to do next, Tim, is we've talked about the importance of research and commonality, how we then take that into questioning as a way then to start to elevate our relationship to that of a trusted advisor, both through questioning and through listening. But of course, another very important part of soft skills is the way that we communicate, and particularly the communication of meaning. And this is an area where we find many commercial teams run into issues, isn't it? Because there's three ways in which you can communicate meaning, and too often we find that we're using words and email alone.
Absolutely. If you look at the science of communication, whether you agree with some of the figures from the UCL work that was done a number of years ago, the fact remains that the bias stays the same. The main way in which we communicate is through gesticulation. Okay, through physiology, what we actually do with our bodies. All right. The second largest, by quite some way, is tonality, which is what we do with our voice. And a little tiny bit of it is through words. Yeah. And yet, certainly as a procurement function, the main way we tend an awful lot of the time to communicate both with stakeholders and with our suppliers is through email, where, and here is an absolute fact, you cannot add tonality to email. And just to sort of clear anything up around there, huge amounts of studies have been done. If you put something in bold, underline it, italics and bold. Okay, the only way that it is, or in capital letters, the only way that it is read by the other person, the recipient, is as passive aggressive. Which is interesting, isn't it? Because you think about that, Ian, in terms of, so A, you can't add tone. The second is that, and certainly because within the UAE region, we do an awful lot of work outside of the region as well. The international rules in terms of how to do business are to use extremely formal language all the time. But I can honestly say that I've never said to Ian, we have run out of bottled water, hence I must go to the supermarket.
That's right.
I don't think I've ever turned to my child Hugo and said, Hugo, you are required to have a shower. Furthermore, I require you to clean your bedroom. And I've certainly never turned to Ian before and left the office and said, kind regards. And it's interesting. And this is not to say, therefore, that there aren't times when using that type of language is important. But and we can't run a poll because of how things are run at the moment. But I'd be interested to know of the let's have a look of the plus 50 odd people on the call. How many of you have kind regards or best wishes in your email signature?
Yeah, I mean, my feeling, Tim, with email is that, I mean, just to bring it to life for the team today, just think about when you're with someone face to face, either in a physical meeting, which of course has been difficult recently, or even on a call. You can tell by someone's body language. Are they attentive? Are they listening? Do they seem concerned? Do they seem interested and engaged in what we're talking about? Are they distracted by other things that are going on? You've got all of that because you can see it. And you'll also know that sometimes if all you're doing is speaking to someone on a phone, you can still tell by the tone of their voice. Do they sound concerned? Do they sound rushed and short of time? Or do they sound interested and engaged? Are they being inquisitive, or do they sound worried? You'll pick all of that up from the tone of their voice. And some of you may have had an experience, for example, of saying to someone on a call, look, you've just said yes to me, but I can tell by the tone of your voice that you don't sound sure. We need to talk about that a little bit more. And then we get to email. And what many people do, some of you I'm sure will share this because I do this, when you write an email, you write it really carefully. And in your head, you're saying it out loud to yourself and you're applying the tone to your email that you want the recipient to receive. But the problem is that once you press send, those words are read by the recipient and they will take whatever tonality the recipient wants to apply to them. You know, we talked only last week to one of our customers. It's a TV station here in the UK. And their head of learning and development was saying that he'd been sent an email and he'd been annoyed by it because it was all someone had done was simply summarised what he'd already written to them. And he just wrote back saying, you've summarised your email. Anyway, they then got on a call and he'd written, you've summarised my email, because he was irritated they hadn't added more content, but they'd taken it as something positive.
Absolutely.
You know, oh, thank you, you've summarised my email. And, you know, Tim and I, we sometimes give this example, 7 simple words. I didn't say he stole my wallet. Now, Tim or I can apply an intonation to any one of those 7 words, and it will completely change the meaning of that sentence. So, for example, if I add intonation to the first word, I didn't say he stole my wallet. Tim, if you do the second.
I didn't say he stole my wallet.
I didn't say he stole my wallet, and you take the point. So I'm not saying to any of you, don't use email. It's effective and it's efficient, particularly for transactional communication. But when it comes to those important times when we're trying to communicate real meaning, do think about, is there an opportunity to lift that into a telephone call or a video meeting? Because that will give potentially that other person a better experience of you, and it will help you build a relationship.
Well, it also, what it does, it negates any risk of communication failures in terms of how we communicate with each other. The 3 main ways in which we communicate as humans are parent, adult, and child. And most of the ways in which we communicate are adult. Those are the conversations that we have. Very simply, Ian, have we filed this? Have we sent over this report? Shall we go out to dinner? And because what I'm doing is I'm talking to Ian in an adult tone, and therefore what I get back is I get an adult-like response from him. The problem happens with email, and this happens with procurement as a function. We said this to the entire of SIPs when we were helping to help define the values for SIPs, was that procurement as a function can be seen often as the policing, or people who want to stick to the rules, etc. And therefore there can sometimes be a butting of heads between stakeholder groups and procurement. But that is only exacerbated by the tone that is put into email, because an awful lot of the time, the emails that we send to our stakeholders and to our suppliers are telling them they need to conform to a certain framework or a set of agreements, or these are the rules, etc. But the way in which that email is therefore written comes across extremely parental. And the moment that you start communicating with somebody in a parental tone, what you get from that individual is you bring out their inner child. And their inner child just says, well, I'm not listening to that, etc. So when we're therefore sending emails that say, dear sir, furthermore, you are required to conform to framework 0.3, 0.4, 0.2, or you shall be removed from the framework, kind regards, it's not actually taken in the right way. So I would just ask you all to have a look after this session and look at the last 15 emails that you sent, and then read them back as the individual that you would have actually sent it to. Try and think, how would they have had that experience? What experience would they have had of you from how that was written? And therefore, it's not to say we don't use this language. Certainly when we are doing business across borders an awful lot of the time, actually we need to use quite formal language. But it is about adapting our style to the individual that we are actually engaging with, isn't it?
It is. And Tim, sometimes teams say to us, well, what words might you use in an email instead of, for example, kind regards or best wishes? And I think our message often is, if an email is replacing a letter, it's a formal communication, absolutely appropriate for that to have formality included within the email. That's its purpose in that situation. And also culturally, if there are people that you're communicating with within, for example, a hierarchy, absolutely appropriate for that to have the appropriate formality applied to it. But if it's with someone that you're building a relationship, just think about, well, actually, is there an opportunity for me to just put a small personal comment on? I hope you had a good weekend, or did you see the result in the cricket last week? Whatever it might be, based on what you know of them through your relationship. Just that start or finish to an email, applying a small amount of personal communication to keep building that relationship and give an experience of yourself. And Tim, when the team do that task, which I hope they do, of perhaps looking at their last 15 emails or so, what I'd also ask them to do is, sometimes if you read through your emails and you realize that actually a lot of them are chasing people because they haven't done something, or you're having to go back to someone to clarify or correct something because they have responded but it was incomplete, or you're having to write to people and you're saying something like, as per my last email, well, that perhaps is a hint to you that there is something more important to be communicated here. And that might be a situation that you want to lift out of email and move to either a telephone call or a face-to-face meeting. Because it can, of course, take time to talk to people, to meet with them, as opposed to just send an email. But actually, if you're having to chase or correct or follow up with people, and that can be avoided through a conversation and a relationship can continue to be built, that to me would feel like a very positive outcome.
100% agree.
Excellent. Well, look, Tim, we've covered a lot of the areas that we wanted to cover today. And I hope for the team that have been with us, there's been, we said when we prepared for today, what we wanted to do for the team was really share what we would call food for thought.
Absolutely.
Different ideas for people to think about, okay, well, I might just try that in my work practice. Or actually, I have seen that situation. I might try that. And I hope that we've achieved that in the time that we've had. Wanted to give you food for thought. But as Sam had asked us, we've left around 10 or 15 minutes, I think, at least, for some questions and answers. So Sam, if I can hand back to you, and I wonder if we've had anything come through from the team today.
Fantastic. Thanks, guys. Ian and Tim, great session.
Thank
Love the
you.
studio. Love the format. It certainly follows the subject matter, and of course, soft skills. Soft skills are exactly what will differentiate you in the new normal, or the different description that that you guys gave me,
Yeah.
which is spot on. So let's just go through a couple of things, and obviously for everyone here, if you do have any questions relating to Ian and Tim's session, just drop them in the Q&A box, and we will put those questions directly to the guys. But I'll just kick off, and actually, funnily enough, there's something interesting that you pointed out, and that was the best way of selling is not to sell at all. I think if there's anything to take away from this session, I think it's that, and it's spot on. It absolutely is spot on. It's going to be obviously product specific, but I think to build that relationship and not have to go out there and actually sell, a scenario whereby people come to you, knowing what you offer and asking you for it, is a novel concept. But I think, as you guys have said, it takes a lot of work. It doesn't happen overnight, and it takes a bit of research. But having said all of that, in the current environment, a lot of things we do is virtual. But of course, soft skills have been soft skills training and theories and methods have been around for a while. How does the virtual application of soft skills and relationship building differ from the traditional face-to-face handshake?
Yeah, well, it's quite fascinating, really. And it's a question we get asked a lot about the training that we offer, and people say, what's the biggest difference? And at the moment, Sam, you're actually on a 60-inch monitor that we can see here at the moment, so you are truly larger than life. And that's so because when we're training people, we ask that people have their cameras on, and we only have, as Ian said, a maximum of 14, so that we can see people and kind of interact with them. Because people say what's the biggest difference, and I say to them, training people is a little bit face to face is like having a film in a cinema. You have people 100% captivated, apart from munching a bit of popcorn, perhaps. Whereas training virtually is a little bit like having exactly the same film but putting it onto Netflix, whereby people are distracted. They might have their partners, their children, cats, dogs, whatever it might be. People normally have dual screens, so they have an email up. So, when we're training people, within the first 5 minutes, we'll normally pick someone up and say, for example, the new extraordinary, you should expect that you are being watched all the time. For example, Claire's just looked at her email and it's come in and she's busy. And Claire goes, and company sort of looks, and therefore we now should get people to come back into it. But I think the biggest thing that has changed are that the rules have changed. Things, for example, like, you'd never get up in a meeting normally, just walk off, grab a water and come back, or just walk off, answer your phone, or, you wouldn't sit there munching through, cake, for example, as we've sat on some calls and been on. And I think people forget why, people forget the rules of engagement a little bit, and they forget they're being watched. There was that awful scenario with one of the Canadian ministers last month where he got back from a run, didn't realise his Zoom call had automatically started, and he decided to take all of his clothes off out of his running gear and get changed into his work clothes in front of most of the Canadian Parliament. So I think that assuming you're being watched all the time is one thing. But also, the other thing I think is that not just assuming that because you're on video call that everyone is okay. Suppliers will, we are now a lot more isolated than we were before, and suppliers will take advantage of the fact that we can segregate procurement away from stakeholders, and we can, engage with people in a simpler way. So whilst a lot of people have Zoom fatigue and they spend a lot more time on Zoom, we are relying a lot more on email than we were beforehand, because you can't just talk across a desk or walk upstairs. And I think that the opportunity, and whenever we train sales teams and whenever we work with procurement teams, we always say, if you have the opportunity to pick up the phone or get on a video call with somebody, you should do that and communicate, because you cannot persuade or influence through text. It just does not work. And you can't build relationships that way either.
Yeah, I think, Sam, what I would add to that, a couple of specific pieces of advice for the team today, really, is when you are on video calls, you are being observed all of the time. You have to assume that. And we observe many meetings where within clients, there's a lot of stakeholders, commercial and client stakeholders involved in calls. And we're seeing two things. If you're dealing now with complex transactions, working with IT firms, with consultancies, what they're doing is they're using a technique called a flying V. So imagine that I'm meeting with a team of you today and I have Tim. Tim only has to step away 2 steps and he can be joining me in a meeting, observing everything, looking for buying signals within the team, but is completely unobserved to everyone else that's in the meeting. And as people start to return to the workplace, we will see that type of tactic being used. The other thing to be aware of is what we also observe a lot is that stakeholders start to give a lot away on calls. And commercial and procurement professionals start to be concerned about that. And they can't kick under the desk, be quiet like they used to. So they turn into Ice King or Ice Queen. And we see that every time, because what we recognise is the stakeholders giving away buying signals. So the commercial practitioner thinks they have to become very formal to try and balance that out. It doesn't balance it out, it's too late. So the way to manage that, of course, is back to where I started, preparation. If I was preparing for an important meeting, which was going to be virtual, I would always try and take 3 or 4 minutes to speak to a stakeholder that was joining me in the meeting, even if I only got one point across to them, and that is, please do not use the word if, only please use the word, please do not use the word when, only use the word if. Because as soon as people start talking about when, you've won.
When this goes ahead.
When we win this, when we bring the team on board. So that's very important in this virtual world, is preparation and making sure stakeholders know what your role in a meeting is and what role you want them to present. Don't give them too much, they won't remember it. Apologies to any stakeholders.
Thanks for that, guys. Right, so great. I mean, there are some significant differences. Is the answer, I guess. There really are some new differences that I guess new skills people need to master in that communication space. I think someone asked me a question the other day whether the virtual world equalizes the playing field between men and women, whereas previously you may have a kind of aggressive approach from a man, and they could get that across in negotiation, but of course the virtual world equalizes that. So I think there are a lot of nuances perhaps, but I'm going to go into a quick fire question mode because we've got 10 minutes and we've got quite a few questions. Okay. So quick fire question. So what's your go-to sentence when you're meeting someone for the first time?
It's always a question that's been pre-prepped based on the research that we've done.
Yeah.
So whenever I'm meeting somebody for the first time, it's always a question based on somewhere. We at the SIPS annual conference, for example, over coffee, you see people stood behind their stands, suppliers expecting procurement people to walk up and say, "I'd like to give you £1 million," and the sales people go, "Oh, that's going to happen," but it's not. For us, it is 3 months worth of research before we go, and I'm walking up to people and saying, "Do you know what? I've read something on LinkedIn last week that you commented on. Really fascinating. Could you just expand on it?" Something that is personal to that person that allows that person to talk about themselves and be animated.
Yeah, there it is. Preparation. We would never enter a meeting without thinking about how do we want to start, and it would nearly always be with a question, unless it was an existing relationship, and then it would just be picking up where we left off with that person the last time.
Fantastic. So basically, it's always bespoke. There isn't a boilerplate question that you can walk in there with. Great. Are there any good books you'd recommend for procurement professional?
100%. So Spin Selling by Neil Rackham. I'll tell you what, Sam, I'll make this really quick and easy. I'll send you a list on email, which you can send out to panelists. There are 3 or 4 books. I'll send you the list with the Amazon links. How's that?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Brilliant.
Okay. Spin is a great place to start, Sam, because it is such a powerful tool for commercial practitioners to use, working with stakeholders, working within their teams.
Well, it's for anyone in business. It basically just teaches you to question effectively.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is, key questioning skills are the best way of learning to be a great communicator.
Yeah, and actually it really helps, Sam, in those situations where we had someone recently on a course who was asking us, actually they work for Amazon, and they said, look, sometimes we get put at short notice into negotiations and we haven't had time to do our preparation. And how do we manage in that situation? Well, you manage through questioning, because what questioning gives you is time to listen and time to think before you then move into whatever your agenda was for that negotiation.
Awesome. Excellent. Thanks for that. Next question. What do you feel is the best approach with regards to training or influencing stakeholders on changing ways of working? especially in larger numbers, 400 plus? What's your best approach?
So we get asked this an awful lot because we train a lot of commercial teams. In fact, we've had this from 2 large clients, and what we've basically done is we did some work with a very large brewer in the UK where we looked at how they were communicating with those stakeholders. And most of the time, the way in which they're communicating was adult to child. What we did is we looked
parent
to child. And what we did is we changed their entire marketing message to have an adult conversation. So instead of being, we're the rules, don't do this, this is how it should be, it's we are here to help you. Okay, engage with us early and let us work with you to help get the organization and get you the best result. And the way that happens is through building commonality with your stakeholders and through being authentic with your stakeholders. People need to see the procurement function rather than being the policing part of it. They need to see them as an absolutely critical asset for being able to get something through nice and quickly.
That's right, Tim. You know, Sam, when you think about the importance of questioning, I talked about how what that does for a salesperson is it starts to create what's called a trusted advisor relationship. And what does a trusted advisor mean? What it means is you kind of have a right of first refusal and you have an open door. And isn't that what procurement want? An open door into leadership and senior stakeholders. So that's the importance of getting that tonality right. And as you say, having those adult to adult conversations, because it doesn't work if stakeholders are having those conversations with their suppliers and then having a parental relationship with their commercial team.
Yeah,
they're not going to value that, and they're not going to give that the same status.
If procurement teams don't have the option to come externally to an organisation, you know, we've had situations where people have said, look, can you train a large group of stakeholders? And what we take an audience of 400 and we just do them in groups of 16. We do 3-hour sessions over a month period to basically say, these are the ways you're being sold to and engage with procurement early. If you don't have the ability to do that, I suggest you sit down with your procurement team and you work out a way to develop a program of learning like that, lunch and learns, power hours, where you can then put all of your stakeholders through it to give them that message. This is how you're being sold to, and this is why it's good to engage with us early.
Yeah, something like we've done today.
In an adult way.
Something like we've done today. You know, I know it's one way, us to you with some questions, but you know that can be very effective because you can just focus on around 2 or 3 core areas that you want to communicate, because people won't remember everything.
No.
Oh, good point. Good points, and something that's quite topical to that answer, and also to the general conversation is from a technical perspective. Do you find the raise your hand option in Teams or Zoom useful, or does it slow the conversation?
Yeah. Well, for me, I think that if you are trying to have a meeting where you have participants that participate rather than attendees that attend, that's the biggest change. If you want to be able to get people's viewpoints, you need to make it clear people need to be on camera, and you need to do it in no more than groups of 14. We've done 16, 18, 8, 10, and the magic number for us is 12 to 14 people. And so I'm not sure it's using the emoji or not using the emoji. I think it is if you want people to participate, you need to do it in a group where people feel they have the opportunity, the time, and they feel comfortable to do it. And therefore, if you've got to run a session 3 times to be able to allow all those different people to participate, then do it. If you have to be dictatorial to some extent, and you have to therefore present to attendees, then yes, but instead of using hands, I'd use Slido.
Yeah, and I think, Tim, you know, really my advice would be set the ground rules at the start of the meeting, because then the expectation is set. It is not giving a good experience to someone if they really need to ask a question or they've misunderstood something and they can't ask that, if they can't raise their hand, because they will then disengage, stop listening. They'll be thinking about the question they want to ask and think opportunities get missed. So don't allow that frustration to build. And the best way to do that is to set the ground rules as you kick off.
And just to finish on that, Sam, the only thing that we would say is that if there are questions we haven't answered today, if you want to send those to us, we're happy to then answer those, record them, and just send them out. Not a problem.
Absolutely.
Awesome. There were a couple of other questions. So what other topics would you recommend to include in soft skills training? So apart from communication, listening, building rapport, tone of voice or body language, are there other things that you would recommend to include in soft skills training?
Controlling buying signals, massive. So looking at buying signals and the body language of giving off buying signals. So how to recognize them and how to control them. Yeah. That's probably one of the largest areas, because there are things that we say and things that we do which are very, very key to suppliers that we a buying signal is where you might do something, Sam, and Ian and I come off the call and go, yeah, Sam's having that. He really liked it. And so getting them to understand that is a massive part of it. And the other side is to just do more research in terms of human to human relationships. And from a soft skill perspective, anything that you can do about where one person interacts with another, not one organization and another. It's not about win-win or win-lose, whatever it might be. It's about recognizing that all of that way in which we communicate is always done individual to individual.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Oh, I think we've lost the sound there, Sam. You still there?
I go immediately into the mute box, I think it's called these days. So
That's right.
there you go. Well, guys, look, it's been a riveting session. Thanks very much. We have a number of questions coming in, but what we will do is for all the attendees, we will communicate the questions, and we will ask Ian and Tim to answer the questions for you, probably offline. There will also be a link to the recording of this session if anyone wants to go through it, which will give you the link on. It'll be on the SIPS YouTube channel. So that's on YouTube. Just look for SIPS or SIPS TV and look for the SIPS MENA playlist. But if people want to get hold of you, Ian and Tim, how do they do that?
Well, they can find us here, and they'll find us both on LinkedIn, and they're welcome to reach out to us anytime.
Any questions, anything at all?
Absolutely.
Please.
You know, we're part of your network now, and you know, we will always be pleased to answer questions or to build that relationship with SIPS further. It's important to us.
And if I might just finish by saying thank you very much to you, Sam,
yeah,
and to Dana, who helped us today, and also to all of SIPS. SIPS as an organisation have done a lot to help a small SME like Ian and I to be able to engage with the community. So we're very, very grateful to you for hosting us, and we're also really grateful to everybody that's taken an hour out of their working day to hopefully listen to what Ian and I have said and hopefully found something useful in it.
Absolutely, it's been a privilege working with you today for this hour. It's gone very fast, as it always does, but I really hope that's been useful to you as a community, and thank you for that opportunity.
It's been a pleasure. Tim Jenkins, Ian Castle from Headspace. Thank you so much for the session. Take care. We'll see you soon.
See you soon.
Take care. Bye-bye now.